Hello everybody, my name is Brady and we are back with another React video, and today we're going to be continuing the Extra History series on the history of paper money. This episode is called Working Out the Kinks, and really, truly, will we ever really work out the kinks? We work out some kinks, and then some new kinks rise from the ashes of those kinks. Economics is a really kinky subject. Wink wink, nudge nudge, more like throwing elbows with that level of subtlety. So I'm excited about this one. This has been a really cool series so far. I've pretty much confirmed that there's 6 episodes, so the next one is going to be the end, and I'm going to be sad to see it go, but there's a lot of subjects I've found that they have covered that are kind of economically based. So we have other things we're going to be able to cover that are sort of related to this stuff. So it's not like I'm losing anything. It's not like there aren't going to be a million other ways to explore this through Extra History's content. So I'm not going to trip about that. They have such a deep library. I'm just excited to get into some more stuff. And I'm going to be putting out a poll pretty soon. When the next episode comes out, I'm putting out a poll on the community tab where you guys are going to be able to vote for the next handful of series that I do from them. So keep an eye out for that. So without further ado, let's get this started. Before we get to the gold standard, we gotta work out the kinks.
Over the last few episodes, we've seen the intellectual underpinnings of paper money slowly come into place. But having nebulous ideas about why paper money might be good is one thing. Getting people to really believe and trust in it is another matter entirely. And so today, we're going to tackle the development of the one thing that brought the whole system together. The thing we now use to prevent the very problem John Law ran himself into.
Normally I have a thought after those introduction things, but I'm not exactly sure. Did he foreshadow what we were going to be talking about? I forget whatever the foreshadowing was in the previous episode, so I guess I have nothing to really build upon. Maybe he's laying it on thicker than I'm seeing and I'm just blind to it.
Very rarely does humanity find ideas that are simply good. Most of the time, when a revolutionary new idea is introduced, we've got to stumble around in the dark for a bit, figuring out all the terrible ramifications and pitfalls that come with it before we can use it well. Paper money was no different, because when you start printing money, it comes with a lot of questions. Now, you might think that the first question would be, how much money should we print? But actually, before you can even figure out things like how to regulate how much money's being printed, you first have to ask, who's going to print the money? Now today, this might seem like a bizarre question, as we're all used to there being some central authority in each country or currency block issuing one currency that everybody accepts at face value.
Oh yeah, paper money wouldn't be as efficient in a world before like the printing press or something like that. Before printing was like more widely, I guess it doesn't have to be widely available. It could just be in the hands of very few higher up type people who could control the printing process, and that actually in some ways would have its own advantages. But I didn't even really think about that. Yeah, the printing press would be kind of a game changer, assuming that's what they're implying.
But you have to remember that paper money didn't enter the world as part of some top-down system. Instead, it basically started with a bunch of bankers realizing that they could give people receipts for gold and silver instead of actually giving customers their gold and silver back. Which means that one by one, every bank basically started printing their own banknotes. And that is a mess to deal with. I mean, if you've ever had to go overseas and deal with exchanging money, you've gotten just a tiny fraction of an idea of what a hassle this would have been. But it gets worse. Imagine having a few hundred different banks issuing notes in your own country. Now imagine a world where our modern international currency exchange that makes it easy for banks to trade money doesn't exist. And then imagine having to deal with all of this just to shop in the next town over. This is basically the scenario you end up with. You deposit $10 worth of gold.
Okay, so we're not getting into like any sort of printing press sort of stuff. Maybe I drew a connection that didn't really need to be made, because like printing existed, but I was thinking like maybe we'd go back a little bit and talk a little bit about like how printing may have impacted the proliferation of paper money and that sort of stuff. But I was maybe making a connection that didn't need to be made there. Never mind.
In your local village bank. They hand you back $10 worth of their shiny bank-specific banknotes. Now, you go off to the big city to spend your money, but when you bring out your money to spend it on something there, the big city merchant might simply not take it. Or, more likely, they'll pull out some big chart and say to you, well, let's see. Your bank is pretty far away, so if we, or more likely our bank, ever wanted to redeem these banknotes of yours, we'd have to travel all the way to your tiny podunk village. So, since that's going to be such an expensive hassle for us to do, we're only going to take your banknotes at 75% value. Now, of course, you would probably grumble a bit over this, but then the merchant would say, wait, hang on, I'm not done. It says here that your bank only has one branch. That's an issue. It means we're going to have to redeem these notes as soon as possible because your tiny bank might go belly up at any time, which would render these banknotes you just gave me worthless. That additional risk and the inconvenience forces me to accept these bills at another 25% off face value. And so, your $10 that you deposited in your bank would only have $5 worth of purchasing power in a neighboring city, leaving...
And I guess this is the argument for, like, centralized economics rather than, like, decentralized systems that would have, like, all these different entities that are kind of working in cooperation with another. If you have like a centralized system, like most countries would probably be a little bit more familiar with today, then you have kind of this universal nature and you don't have to deal with this BS. And centralizing things will make people skeptical, but there are those cases in which this would benefit the regular person. One would hope as much as it benefits the people on like the higher levels, but there's always going to be those people on the higher levels that exploit things, which give it a bad rep. And I guess that's why centralization tends to get kind of a bad rep. So yeah, it's not a perfect system, but yeah, we to move towards that would make it more convenient for Joe Schmo from like that small town to actually be able to know that the banknotes that he has are worth something because they accept the same banknotes pretty much everywhere. Okay, that makes sense.
You probably a bit less than jazzed about this whole paper money thing. So clearly, every country needed a unified currency that everyone could believe in. But this also had to evolve sort of organically, and it ended up happening in a similar way in most countries, because almost all of the problems we're gonna see with the move to paper money are solved in nearly every country with one great innovation: the central bank. But central banks didn't always solve all of the functions they do today, and in fact, most weren't established to solve any of them at all. Truth is, calling a central bank a singular big innovation would be a lie. They were really more like a patch server and a hotfix machine for paper money. So let's talk about the story of the Bank of England, because it was really the first institution that we would call a central bank, and many early central banks share a similar tale. The year...
Yeah, like I'm familiar with like the early American Republic, so I think of Alexander Hamilton, who started like the first American central bank, which was a very controversial issue, but he was incredibly inspired by the British system. Although Americans broke off of the British system, most of them actually seemed to recognize, yeah, that's pretty much the best political system so far. Like, we want to do something better, but we can definitely borrow from that sort of stuff. And Hamilton specifically wanted to borrow economically. On economic issues, however, it's a little iffy with how our exception of that went. But this is kind of probably what like the Hamilton types would have been looking at.
Is 1694. The government desperately needs a way to service its debts. The 17th and the 18th centuries would be times of unbelievably costly wars. For the first time, troops had to be deployed and supplied across the globe. Navies had to be maintained in every ocean. Powder and shells were expended on an unprecedented scale. This drove most major nations of Europe to the brink of financial collapse. To some, the answer was clear: establish a bank to service the national debt. So, after much debate, the Bank of England came to be. This is a powerful thing, because having the government do all of its banking with your bank makes your bank pretty secure, and means that that bank's gonna need to have branches, or at least banks that they work closely with all over the place. And because of this security, people started to value Bank of England banknotes over most of the other ones out there. At times, people would even pay a premium for them, offering 1.1 or 1.2 pounds per 1 pound note, simply because they were reliable and universally accepted. But the Bank of England note really wouldn't become the official banknote of the country until 1844, the middle of the 19th century.
It's a slow adoption process. Like, if you try to, force in something from, top down, it's gotta be gradual, typically. A lot of people will think about politics in a very abstract way and think okay, this is going to make things better, so let's just straight up implement it. But people need to be ready to accept that implementation and for it to work out. I'm considered kind of a left-leaning person, so a lot of the things that I want could theoretically be accomplished with kind of a heavy hand of government. But if that were to happen, it's a very good chance it would fall apart because people aren't willing to accept it. People typically don't love change. So I'm not surprised if these systems take a long time. Like America, we had a national bank and then we didn't, and then we did again. And it was a mess. It really was a mess. And look at us now. We're still a mess, but we're pretty firm on the paper money train. Some people are even ready to move beyond the paper money train. A lot of us are ready for the next step.
With the Bank Charter Act of 1844, no new bank would be granted the right to print banknotes, and every time a bank was bought, it would have to remove its notes from circulation, meaning that eventually the Bank of England banknote would be the only paper money in the land. But even with this system, it wasn't until 1921, less than 100 years ago, that the last non-Bank of England bank in the country stopped printing their own banknotes. And in Scotland and Ireland, there are still to this day a few banks that retain their ancient right to print pound sterling notes. So this system of having one unified currency that we think of as being money, we take it for granted now, but it really isn't that old. In fact, in the United States, non-Federal Reserve banknotes were being issued as late as 1935. But even with this issue resolved, the lack of a centralized currency wasn't the only problem we were going to have to figure out with these new banknotes. There was also the problem of bank runs. With the invention of the banknote, modern fractional reserve banking really came into its own. Fractional reserve banking is where the bank lends out more than it can actually pay for with the money it has on hand, based on the idea that not everybody's going to try to collect at once. So, for example, let's say that you deposit $100 in gold at your bank, and the bank is required to keep a 10% fractional reserve. That means that when you deposited that $100 in gold, you enabled your bank to lend out an additional $1,000 in banknotes. This system is a great thing because it means that the money supply can expand far past the amount of gold or silver in an economy and can meet the needs of a growing economic base, which is the very problem we were trying to solve with this whole paper money thing in the first place. But it does have one problem. What happens if everybody does try to get their money out of the bank at the same time? Well, if people believe that a bank won't be able to repay them, whether it's because they've issued too many banknotes or simply because they've made too many bad loans, those people start flocking to the bank to get their money out of there. This, of course, leaves the bank unable to pay anybody because they only keep a fraction of what they need to pay everyone on hand at any given time.
So we've kind of already gotten examples exactly like this, and this is the first time he's really broke down fractional reserve banking, but he's already given examples where this sort of stuff happens. And I wonder how far this is actually going to go. Since the next one is called the gold standard, I wonder if we're going to get into more modern economic crisis. I don't think we will. They don't seem like they tie it in that close. I thought they were going that direction before, but now I'm thinking there isn't going to be time for that. But I guess there's only time will tell. All right.
So the bank collapses and everybody loses. Anyone with money left in the bank is simply wiped out. And if this starts happening on a broad scale, it creates another problem. People stop depositing money in banks at all, and instead start hoarding it because they're afraid that the banks are going to go bust. Meanwhile, the banks are trying to hoard up as much real money, gold, silver, and central bank notes as they can, so that they can somehow pay all of the people rushing the bank to withdraw their accounts without going bust. This ultimately means that a lot of money is just sucked out of the economy. It just stops circulating, and we're back to our original problem of literally having too little money to make the economy run. This happened in England throughout the 19th century. But here again, the central bank patch was applied. By having a central bank serve as a lender of last resort, meaning a bank that could lend real capital to other banks, banks that were in good shape but didn't have the funds on hand to withstand a panic where everybody tried to withdraw their money at once, could survive, and the money supply for the nation wouldn't dry up.
It's kind of like a bailout. Kind of. A bailout that I guess... I don't know if this is like exactly that. I don't know what the system is for giving it back. If this is like a literal bailout, he's going into this in kind of like broad terms, so I'm not completely sure. I don't know about the English cycle, if it is like a boom and bust cycle and then supplemented with bailouts or something like that. That's kind of how America is and will be going probably for a very long time. We get these like boom bust cycles with bailouts in between.
Over the last 100 years, we have found dozens of other little ways that the central bank can be used to hotfix problems resulting from our ability to print money, and we're certainly not done yet. There is incredible power in having one bank that basically can't fail unless the government does, whose function is much more about keeping an economy strong and stable than about making a profit. Because so long as the government is doing well, so is that central bank. And this has helped fuel the growth of a world no longer bound by the amount of gold and silver that's being passed around. But there's one more step to go before we get to the world we live in today, where currency is divorced from any real value except the value we give it, where money works because we believe it works. And that step is abandoning the gold standard. Yeah. So join us next time as we wrap up the history of paper money.
And beyond the gold standard, I've been saying like we're ready to like move on to the next thing, but we do kind of I don't know. I guess you could say debit cards and credit cards and stuff. A lot of that is kind of an extension of paper money, like debit cards especially, since like they actually represent real money that you have, while credit cards represent kind of like a theoretical money that you could have. So I don't know if like those are like the next step beyond paper money, or if the next step beyond paper money is like a Bitcoin type thing. I don't really know. Or like using stocks as currency, or whatever the heck we're going to be doing next. So the next one, we're going to be talking about abandoning the gold standard. Sounds cool. We got to learn a little bit about the value of hard currency, and now we're going to start realizing, hey, maybe we can live without it. Okay. That should be cool. Thank you guys for watching. This has been a whole lot of fun, and when that next video comes out, keep an eye out. We got that poll. It's going to be dropping in the community tab not long after or before. I can't guarantee an exact time. We'll see if I remember. Might be a little late, maybe a little early. We'll see. All right. Thanks for watching. I will see you guys tomorrow with another couple videos. All right. Bye.